I'm going to prepare you guys for Suttree, which we start next week. The first 90 pages you'll have read for Tuesday. Suttree is a very different kind of book than Outer Dark. Outer Dark is a cold literary horror novel. Suttree seems to have come from a completely different writer. Not just a different kind of book, like a different kind of consciousness. Suttree is all about the interior of those characters. You have Cornelius Suttree, who's the Suttree of the title, who's forsaken a life of privilege to live among the outcasts on a houseboat on the Tennessee River in Knoxville. You have a comic character named Gene Harrogate. There's very little comedy in Outer Dark. Very early on in Suttree, Gene Harrogate is arrested for having sex with a farmer's watermelons. He is known as the Midnight Melon Mounter. Yeah, you can't really conceive of that existing in Outer Dark at all. I think Suttree's Cormac's most human book in a lot of ways, and it's his most autobiographical. It takes place in 1952. And this is really important to emphasize that this is as accurate a depiction of the pre-civil rights South as I've read in fiction. It's important to keep in mind that you're like looking at a time capsule. Suttree, like Cormac, comes from, as I said, a life of privilege, but wants to live with the people and be around the people and have community with folks who are seen as like the outcasts. So most of his friends are criminals. His friends are black at a time when white people and black people weren't supposed to fraternize, right? His relationships are entirely with folks that are on the margins of society, which is the way he wants it. You also get the sense from the early pages that Suttree is out of place, and you can't quite imagine where this guy would be at home. But he's making a go of it among... It's a great little phrase at the end of this prologue to Suttree that says, ruder forms survive. And ruder in the sense that the more kind of rugged that something is, the more survival energy it potentially has, the more it can kind of outlast. And I think Suttree wants to be one of those kinds of guys. So, talk a little bit about my experience with it because I want to prepare you for it. Outer Dark presents challenges because of the subject matter, because of the distance, because of the coldness, because of the horror that it represents. Suttree doesn't really have that. It has moments of bad things, but it's a fuller picture of life, and a life that is recognizable, more recognizable to you and I. In terms of its technique, it's often quite stream of consciousness, or it uses the Joycean stream of consciousness technique. That's something I want you to take, to keep in mind as you read. Also, the first time I read this, I read the first 3 pages, and my first thought, this is before I'd read Cormac's in my 20s, my first thought was, oh no. Because the prose is like very dense, and I was like, okay, this is going to be work. work in a very different way than Outer Dark. So I'd injured myself at the time. When I would come home from the physical therapist, I'd get the ice pack out of the freezer, and I'd lie down on it for like 15 minutes, and I'd read like a 15-minute chunk of Suttree. That would be my Suttree reading for the day. And the farther I got in it, the more I found that like ice time would be over, and then I'd like go sit in my recliner and sit there and read, and it sucked me in. Once I finished it, the way I felt about it is not the way I felt about All the Pretty Horses or Blood Meridian or No Country for Old Men. The way I felt about it was like, well, I'm glad I read that. I probably won't return to that many times. And then the more I lived with it, the more it sort of resonated with me. I found myself picking it up off the shelf to read particular scenes or reading someone like a passage. Because, I mean, often they're very, very funny. Or like, you know, looking for like this kind of like section of dialogue between Suttree and one of his buddies. Then I think a few years after I read it for the first time, I was like, oh, let me sit down with this again. And I was kind of blown away the second time. And I didn't understand why I hadn't recognized how brilliant it was. And now it's become one of Cormac's books that I pick off the shelf most often. There's a kind of sweet sadness to the book. It's a little bit of an elegy for a bygone time. And Cormac, when he finished the book, packed up and moved west to El Paso from Knoxville. His next book is Blood Meridian. All right, so he changes the way he thinks, changes the way he writes, changes pretty much everything about himself. So I would say prepare to spend more time with it, prepare to sometimes grapple with the prose and wrestle with it. I think if you feel like you're struggling, that's probably right. There'll be times you might be confused, and that's fine too. He modeled it on James, in some ways, he modeled it on James Joyce's Ulysses. I don't expect anyone in here to have read Ulysses. How many of you know about James Joyce's Ulysses? Okay, so several of you, right? So Ulysses is probably the most, in some ways, the most famous novel of the 20th century. Maybe it is the most famous novel of the 20th century. James Joyce became ultra famous and canonized because of Ulysses. It takes place on a single day. The action of Ulysses takes place on a single day, June 16th, 1904. And we follow a man named Leopold Bloom, who is an Irishman whose father was a Hungarian Jew. And so he has a lineage that places him sort of out of step with some of the other Dubliners. His wife, Molly, is cheating on him with a man named Blazes Boylan. He meets on this particular day that the novel happens a young man named Stephen Dedalus, who's a kind of intellectual. And Joyce appropriates all of the wanderings of Odysseus and the Odyssey and reworks them for a modern context. So when Joyce says, well, what would an Odysseus be like now? And he decides, oh, he would be an Irish newspaper advertising salesman, right? His struggles would not be like, slaying a literal cyclops or blinding a literal cyclops. They would be dealing with a racist Irish nationalist in a pub, so on and so forth. The level of detail that Joyce pours into Ulysses about Dublin on this particular day and time is staggering. There's a sense that if Dublin had been destroyed, you could rebuild Dublin brick by brick using Ulysses as a kind of blueprint. And there's a similar sense with Suttree that you could rebuild 1952 Knoxville using Suttree as a blueprint. In Knoxville, they've preserved a kind of river walk where you can take the Suttree tour of Knoxville, and they have a life-size bronze statue of Suttree in a fishing boat, like rowing. Right? It's pretty fantastic. It is okay to be young and to enter a world you don't know anything about, right? To enter a world of literature that you're not aware that there's a tradition, that you don't understand its importance. It's okay to be young and not know things. This is the place where you come to know things. I know on TikTok, history started yesterday, right? But it takes years and years and years of reading to kind of situate yourself and to begin to get your bearings. So when you say, Outer Dark, I don't really get it, you're going to need some time. You're going to need some time. And that's okay too. That's okay too. Like, that's part of an education, is getting your bearings. Questions about Suttree before we go forward? Just wanted to lay a little... Sir?
Okay, this is probably no question, but is Suttree a real person?
No, he's a character. He's based on Cormac McCarthy to some degree. To some degree, right? It's a thinly, or not thinly, it's a fictionalized account of Cormac's life. Sir?
This is a dumber question. Kind of based off him. So does that mean like watermelon?
No. I feel like sometimes I feel like when I say words,
Yeah.
you don't listen to the words I say. Well, no, I feel like
Give my own interpretation.
that's very true. I think that's... So there's a character named Gene Harrogate. He's the melon mounter. And Suttree is an older man who now we're...
I forgot names. I'm bad with names.
I mean...
Yeah, okay. That makes more sense.
Is this the dumb... I mean, we've had a dumb question. We've had... and then...
No, this is... I just don't know much about McCarthy. Is he from Knoxville?
He's from Knoxville, Tennessee.
He's like from Rhode Island.
He was born there, but he moved to Knoxville when he was like 3 or something. He was very schmarl. So he has the Tennessee accent. Page 231. I have some big questions to ask you. I'm scared to ask the questions I have, but I do have some big questions. Home came limping out of the woods and crossed a small field toward the light, insects rising out of the dark and breaking on his face like rain, and his fingers trailing in the tops of the wet sedge. He could hear no sound save a faint moaning like the wind, but there was no wind. When he entered the glade, he could see men seated about the fire, and he hobbled on, one hand raised, into the firelight. When he saw what figures warmed there, he was already among them, and it was too late. There were 3 of them, and there was a child squatting in the dust, and beyond them the tinker's cart with the hung pans catching the light, like the baleful eyes of some outsized and mute and mindless jury assembled there hurriedly against his coming. "Howdy," said the bearded one. "Ain't seen you for a while." He looked at them. They wore the same clothes, sat in the same attitudes, endowed with a dream's redundancy, like revenants that recur in lands laid waste with fever, spectral, palpable as stone. What's a revenant? Something that comes back and haunts you. What were you saying, Steve?
Like a spirit or a ghost?
Yeah. It's like, I feel like in the South we have interesting words for like you've heard probably haint. Haint.
Is that synonymous with the revenant?
What's up?
Is that synonymous with the revenant?
I think a haint is a similar kind of. Yeah, haint. Who was it in here? Was it someone who was talking about working on an eldritch horror thing? Was it you that talking about eldritch horror?
No?
That's okay if you weren't. I thought somebody was using, because we have the term eldritch. It made me think of this class. But maybe the person, was it you talking about eldritch? It's okay. This is not an accusation. If you,
No, I like horror.
yeah. Anyway,
Was it?
maybe I dreamt it. Maybe I dreamt. Sometimes one dreams the eldritch horror.
I think so.
He looked at the child. It had a healed burn all down one side of it, and the skin was papery and wrinkled like an old man's. It was naked and half coated with dust, so that it seemed lightly furred, and when it turned to look up at him, he saw one eyeless and angry red socket like a stokehole to a brain in flames. He looked away. By the way, that goes down for the most horrifying, for me personally, the most horrifying image in the book right there. Why is that so? Maybe it's not as disturbing to you. If it was disturbing, what is the one-eyed child, or yeah?
I think it's like, it's obviously it's a grotesque, image, but your brain automatically goes to, well, a set of circumstances produced it. This is the first time we've seen the child since the very beginning of the book, where the tinker hands it off to a wet nurse. And so it's like, how did the wet nurse, either that means that the Archons killed the wet nurse and took the child and then tortured it, or the wet nurse was irresponsible and didn't want to nurse the child anymore, gave it away, and it's just been wandering or been maimed by other people.
Right.
And maybe the Archons just found it and took it along with them.
The kid's seen better days. Yeah.
There's the suggestion of inhumanity in the child being lightly furred, and there's something really especially disturbing about a human-made animal when the human is a child this young.
Well said. Well said. Something disturbing about a human-made animal when the human is a child this young. Sir.
I think the description of the skin is really unsettling.
Yeah, it is unsettling. It is
Think of,
unsettling.
a baby or a child having super plump, I guess new
Right.
skin, not especially not papery. I don't really tend to think of skin at all to ever be papery.
Well, I think it's a great description if you have loved ones that are very elderly, and their skin becomes really papery thin, and it can even have a kind of dryness like that, right? And I think it'd be a great description of someone in their late 80s or 90s, but for a newborn, like you were saying, it's I don't know, it's very disturbing. It's distressing.
Also, the eye, I don't know, just missing an eye, and I'm not thinking an eye that's been missing for a couple months, or if it is being terribly infected, or but then we go into Stokehold to a brain in flames, and I'm thinking
Yeah.
horror in this face, and then I also
Right.
saw a video on Twitter the other day of someone getting their eye ripped out.
Ah!
So it was oh, and then it's for that on a baby. Yeah.
I'm more disturbed now by the Twitter content than I am.
What was that?
No. It's not. It does sound like a fight indeed.
I was wondering, sorry.
Sit and rest a spell, the man said. Holmes squatted, favoring his off leg. The child kept watching him. Who's youngern? He said. Harmon guffawed and slapped his thigh. What happened to his eye? Holmes said. What eye? His eye, he gestured. The one he ain't got. I reckon he must have lost it somewheres. He still got one. He ought to have two. Maybe he ought to have more than that. Some folks has two and can't see. Holmes didn't say anything. I reckon that tinker might know what happened to it. What tinker? That in yon tree, said Harmon, pointing with the rifle. Hush, don't pay him no mind, mister. What did you do to your leg there? And for the first time we have the word. Nothing. The bearded one was tunneling gouts of mud from the welt of his boot with a stick. Well, I see ye didn't have no trouble finding us. I wasn't hunting ye. You got here all right for somebody bound elsewhere. I wasn't bound nowheres. I just seen the fire. I like to keep a good fire. Man never knows what all might chance along, does he? No. Anything's liable to wash up from nowhere bound. Good description of Kala, by the way. He's from nowhere bound. Where are you bound? Holmes said. I ain't, the man said, by nothing. He looked up at home. We ain't hard to find once you found us. What does it mean to be bound? To be bound by nothing? Sir.
It means that like you come from no place, you have no heritage, no origin.
But to be bound by nothing. To be bound by
Nothing it means free.
free.
Well, he has no allegiance, no obligation, no emotional ties. We can infer that he doesn't have any emotional ties to any other people, maybe other than those other two with him.
To be unbound.
Yeah, he's not bound by society.
If we think of a book, right? A book has been bound. Its leaves, pages are kept together, right, by its binding. If it's unbound, then like the pages are free, but the pages are also free to get lost, disordered, right, damaged in various ways. Also, that whole "we ain't hard to find once you found us," there's something very devilish about that, right? It's like the whole vampire, you invite the vampire in, but like once you found the devil, you can always find him quickly. That's why you don't want to be finding the devil. Holmes looked away. His sweat-blistered forehead shone in the firelight. He looked toward the tinker's cart. He looked at the child. Where's she at? He said. Who's that? My sister. Ah, said the man. The one run off with that tinker. Them's his traps yonder. The bearded one turned his head slightly and looked and turned back. Aye, that and you used to trade with. I never give him no chap, Holmes said. I just told her that. Maybe this and some other chap. It ain't nothing to me. The bearded one raked a gobbet of clay from his stick and cast it into the fire. You know what I figure, he said? What? I figure you got this thing here in her belly your own self, and then you laid it off on that tinker. I never laid nothing off on no tinker. I reckon you figured he'd keep him hid for ye. I never figured nothing. What did ye give to him? I never give nobody nothing. I never had nothing. Never figured nothing. Never had nothing. Never was nothing. He was looking at nothing at all. Why all the constant harping on nothing, 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 nothing? What's all that about? Steve,
My shot at this. That was like one of my favorite lines. Like,
tell me about it.
like, man, that like one of my favorite lines. Like, it low key beats It low key beats like, come eat this meat. Like, it almost beats it. It almost beats it.
Come share this meat.
Oh, come share this meat. But I think the bearded man kind of like, I don't want to say attacks, but like pierces color. You know, like you always have that response. Nothing. I have nothing. I have no trade. I'm from nowhere. It's just me and my sister.
Right.
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 And I feel like he's just saying like, you always say this.
Mm-hmm.
And like it's just, it feels like he's like calling out color. You are nothing.
What is it to be nothing? What does it mean to be nothing? Never had nothing. You have the double negative, right? Never had nothing. What does it mean to be nothing?
I don't think it makes any sense because we never truly experienced nothing.
What do people mean by it? Let's start there.
I think it's an insult. I mean, if you're mad at someone in Southern, you would say you
In Southern, in the original Hillbilly.
Yeah, you say you ain't nothing, which
You
is
ain't
like,
nothing.
You are nothing.
you are of no consequence. You don't matter. You like how the bearded guy kind of said like I can't be bothered
Mm-hmm.
because you are nothing.
Right.
It's kind of like that.
At the end of Blood Meridian in the saloon in Fort Griffin, the kid, now the man, tells the judge, "You ain't nothing," and the judge's response is, "You speak truer than you know." Right? I mean, there's kind of a play almost with like the Eastern idea of nothing, of no thingness, like, which is not an insult. To be not be bounded, to be unbounded, not to be bound by thingness, not to be your hands, not to be your feet, not to be your face, to be more than that. Were we talking, was it this class we were talking about, are there things you could lose and still be you?
Was it?
Some
I
of
don't think
you-
it was.
So about it, we talked about it with all the things that we-
Let me ask this. If you lost your foot, would you still be yourself?
Yeah.
Jamal, you seemed,
I mean, I feel like it's different for me. I mean, it's different for everybody.
why is it different from you? Why is it different from you?
I don't know. I just grew up with like a history of sports. So like both my parents they played Division I sports. I never did it, but you know,
Right.
I still play to this day.
Right.
I consistently work out, and if I had one foot, I wouldn't be able to do it.
Okay, now see, like, I like this, right? So you can say, like, oh, I could lose a pinky toe and still be myself. I could lose this, that, and the other. But you lose a foot, okay, like, it doesn't mean that you're still not yourself. However, if part of how you think about yourself is athletics, it's a big part of your life. It's a big part of how you relate to other people, how other people relate to you, how your family thinks about you, right? And you're not able to do that, well, that does change you.
It also like affects you mentally. Have you seen the Iron Claw?
I just watched it yesterday. How do you?
Remember Alan White's character?
Mhm.
How he was like at the top of the world. He had like a motorcycle accident, and then everything went downhill from there. And he
Right.
was like, I can't deal with the pain anymore, and he ended up killing himself.
Right.
That's kind of what I think will also happen. And like, at least in my point, like
Right.
I feel like sports is just a major part of my life, and like playing with my friends is probably one of the only ways I bond with some of them. 'Cause I just like a lot of them. A lot. But like, I just feel like that's just kind of what will happen because it just mentally messes you up. Like the pain constantly, all the medicine, trying to adjust if you have to go like get a prosthetic for your leg. I feel all that would just like mentally mess you up.
I mean, I think there's a lot of wisdom to that. I think there's a lot of wisdom just to like, we have a reaction to think, oh, I could lose this and still be me. I could lose that and still be me. Well, you might become someone else. You might find something that's better than what you have. But to think that losing part of this doesn't change you, that doesn't seem at all correct, Steve.
To make it even deeper, like not losing a physical part of yourself, but losing like people in life, like that like I think I don't know if our class like that, but like being shaped by your community. Like I'm a person of community. Like I'm not myself without my family, my friends.
I love that.
And so without even missing one person, for example, I lost my great grandmother during COVID, and like and I had COVID too, and like I lost her, and it was like I lost a part of my heritage because I would never be able to ask her how her life was as a child, what the culture was like when she was around, and I've lost the opportunity to do so. So it's like if I lost her, I lost a little bit myself, because my people we're not keeping our history, because it's just hard to keep up like a minority group in their culture.
You should do that. No, seriously, you should record it as much as possible. You know, I think that's really important. I wish I'd done more of that while more of my people were around. I think that's great. Like, it doesn't just have to be like your physical appendages. It can be your physical family and what they represent, what they carry inside them. The mute ones seem to sleep. crouched at the man's right with his arms dangling between his knees like something waiting to be wakened and fed. Now, see, that's not good. What are you? Holm muttered. What? He said it again solemnly. The bearded one smiled. I said, now, we've heard that before, ain't we? You ain't nothing to me. But the man didn't seem to hear. He nodded as if spoken by other voices. He didn't look at home. You never did say what you done with your sister. I never done nothing with her. Where's she at? I don't know. She run off. You done told that. It ain't nothing to you. I'll be the judge of that. Harmon turned his cheek against the upright rifle barrel. He smiled dreamily. I reckon little sister's just a little further on up the road, ain't she? The man said. I don't know. I ain't seen her. No. I allowed maybe you had, Holmes said. You seem to know everybody's business. I guess it ain't nothing to me. Is that right? Holmes didn't answer. The man wiped the stick and poked it into the fire and stretched forth his boot. Hand him here, he said. What? Hand him here, young chap. Holmes didn't move. The child had not stopped watching him. Unless you'd rather for Harmon to do it. He looked at Harmon and he bent forward and picked up the child. It made no gesture at all. It dangled from his hands like a dressed rabbit, a gross eldritch doll with ricket-sprung legs and one eye opening and closing softly like a naked owl's. He rose with it and circled the fire and held it out toward the man. The man looked at it a moment, and then he took it with one hand by its upper arm and placed it between his feet. What do you want with him? Holmes said. Nothing. No more than you do. He ain't nothing to me. No. Where's that tinker as if he was raising him? He's all raised out. He can't raise no more. You don't need him. Water in the summer and fire in the winter's all I need. We ain't talking about what I need. He spat across the child's head into the fire, and a thin chain of sparks ascended in the gray-green smoke. That ain't what's concerned. No. You ain't no different from the rest, from any man born and raised and have his own and die. They ain't one man in 3 got even a black suit to die in. Holmes stood with his feet together and his hands at his sides like one arraigned. What's his name? The man said. I don't know. He ain't got an Aryan. No, I don't reckon. I don't know. They say people in hell ain't got names, but they had to be called something to get sent there, didn't they? The tinker might have named him. It wasn't his to name. Besides, names die with the namers. A dead man's dog ain't got a name. He reached and drew from his boot a slender knife. Holmes seemed to be speaking to something in the night beyond them. My sister would take him, he said. That chap. We could find her, and she'd take him. It's not much of one, but this is the first moment in the book where Holmes has showed any concern for or care for his child. Right? It's the slightest moment, but he suggests that, hey, we can do something. We can do something here. The man's response is just, yes. I've been hunting her. Harmon was watching the man. Even the mute one stirred. The man took hold of the child and lifted it up. It was watching the fire. Holmes saw the blade wink in the light like a long cat's eye, slant and malevolent, and a dark smile erupted on the child's throat and went all broken down the front of it. The child made no sound. It hung there with its one eye glazing over like a wet stone and the black blood pumping down its naked belly. The mute one knelt forward. He was drooling and making little whimpering noises in his throat. He knelt with his hands outstretched and his nostrils rimpled delicately. The man handed the child, and he seized it up, looking once at home with witless eyes, and buried his moaning face in its throat. The most disturbing thing about that passage, the most disturbing things are the words moaning, wet, and then drooling and whimpering. That's what, for me, that's what sells the horror of all that. Now, that last paragraph is what you kids like to call a lot. One of my big questions for you guys, do you think that novels, we've touched on this before, but I want you to think about this in a more personal sense in terms of your own writing. Do you think that there are things that a novel shouldn't do? Do you think that novels have I know you guys love this word, moral responsibility? Do you think that novels have a social responsibility?
One of the best books that I've read in the last 2 years, and one of the worst books that I've read in the last 2 years, the same book, and it's I think, a Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires.
Okay.
And it was personally horrifying to me, because of the way, like, it takes the vampire trope and it makes it almost insect-like, and it's this one, like, slick, smooth-talking con man preying on the children, on the women and children of this, suburban 90s town in South Carolina. And it was horrifying, and I hated it, and I also thought it was incredibly well written and a great way to explore the dynamics of suburban white, nuclear family households.
Mm-hmm.
And it was great social commentary and very horrifying and disturbing.
Okay.
And so I think that if you are going to write something that is, I guess, a lot,
Mm-hmm.
you should do it with intention and purpose and care. And doing so without that is like throwing a bunch of Michael Bay explosions on the screen for no reason.
Interesting. Sir.
I'm a bit of an extremist. I don't think there should be any limits whatsoever in the content of a novel. I think a writer should be unflinching in whatever it is they seek to portray. And as far as a novel's moral or social responsibility, I think the only one that exists is the novel's obligation to be beautiful. And what beautiful means in an aesthetic sense can be
Mhm.
widely and should be debated.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's different standards across time, culture, etc.
Mhm.
But the novel's only obligation should be to be beautiful.
To be a great work of art. And beyond that, there's no social or moral responsibility. Is that view? Sir.
I mean, I think that, again, I can agree with that, like, novels shouldn't necessarily be like, that a novel should be unfettered by some degree of what's good picked, but I do think, like, I'm not going to say it has a moral responsibility to not, I guess, espouse or agree with, like, bad ideas or bad morals, but I don't necessarily think that, like, it should be, I just think personally, your book probably shouldn't be, like, racist, your book probably shouldn't be homophobic, your book probably shouldn't be, like, sexist or spouses.
Okay, that's great. That's
Certain people in certain, like, steps.
okay. Is there the larger kind of discussion? Is there a place for those things, racism, bigotry of any kind, right? Is there a place for that in art, or should a book only espouse moral principles? I think that's the larger question, right? That we're driving at with that. Or am I misreading you?
I don't necessarily think so. I mean,
You don't necessarily think I'm
I don't-
misreading?
Yeah, I don't necessarily think it was written.
we'll come back to you. Shayna.
I was just gonna say that out of my grad majors, art history is one of them, and writing to me, novels are a work of art. So this is something we talk about in art history, and like in one of my classes yesterday, we were looking at a etching from the Renaissance, and you don't necessarily understand when you first look at it what it's saying, but once you examine it and you understand what the icons are, then you understand how hateful that work of art is towards women. It's basically saying women have no virtue, whatever. And so I think it's kind of the same thing where it's like that is a hateful work of art. But at the same time, in art history, it's still valid as art because it has affected art history. So it's like
It's a time capsule from this time when
and so
it reflected these attitudes.
yeah, and it's like not that like I think it's still important to learn why that's hateful, and I love Great Gatsby. Scott Fitzgerald was anti-Semitic. He was racist.
Right.
Other things.
Sure.
So I think you need to understand those things, but at the same time, I don't necessarily know if it invalidates the novel.
Yeah. I mean, I think
I
it's.
think context is important.
Yeah, it seems like what you're talking about is this is an age-old question now. Can we separate the art from the artist? And if we can, what do we gain? Like, if we say all these things about Fitzgerald, right, which seem accurate to me, can we say Fitzgerald had these reprehensible views and also wrote a great novel called The Great Gatsby, right? Like, so those two things are paradoxical, but also exist. Amelia?
Yeah, I kind of think I want art to be very specifically in this scenario, talking about writing. It ought to be completely go wild. You need write what you need to write. You shouldn't be limited.
Right.
But and then I guess there is always this concern. I guess somebody will write the book of this is why being racist is awesome.
Right.
And, when
yeah.
you look at something in the past from right now, like you can analyze like a Victorian piece of work, and you can see the attitudes, both the positive and the negatives.
Right.
But then it's kind of weird to think about it when you're living in that time right now. It's like, wait, I don't want this behavior to be encouraged.
Right. Well, I think that there is a frame that really great art uses. And really great art, whether it's visual art, not that I'm any kind of authority on that, I would defer to Shayna about that. But Suttree, for example, is this great work of art that captures this time in 1952 Knoxville, pre-civil rights South, where, the N-word, not a word I've told you the way I feel about that word. Don't want to be around the word. Feels crazy to hear that word. Also, these characters at this particular time spoke in this way, right? So I think there's this frame where you capture an author capturing the way people behave, the way they speak, what their values are, is not an endorsement of those values, etc., and is a depiction of it can be done in such a way you're like, holy crap, like you feel like, oh, these are people and they don't seem to have tusks and they don't seem to be monsters, but they think in this way that's really, today we think about it as just wild, crazy way to think about other people. So I think there's a frame. I think that is different from a novel that would be, as you said, quote, racism is amazing, right? Like that would be, it would be, I haven't read that novel. I believe that novel could, not that it should, I believe theoretically that a racist novel could be written, like an explicitly like pro-racism kind of novel. It would be theoretically interesting to like what would that be? And I have no doubt that's like a racist piece of art could exist, like something that, well, we know there are examples of this, like Griffith's Birth of a Nation, like one of the first films is like celebrating the Klan and depicting black people in this really horrific way, et cetera, et cetera.
The racist novel does exist. Like the Turner Diaries is a countercultural,
God, about the Turner.
white supremacist novel about a group of white people that band together and perform ethnic cleansing in the United States. And it's been influential in the way white supremacist cells.
Didn't like Timothy McVeigh like read that, or like a lot?
Shooters, domestic terrorists. It's often one of those things when the FBI goes poking around your house, they find it in your nightstand or something. So this might.
Isn't that? But just to pause, isn't that a kind of incredible thing to think about? Like there's a document. I've never seen it. I've heard about it. I've only seen it like on documentaries. There's this document thing called the Turner Diaries that's out there in the world, and lone wolf, domestic terrorists, crazy people gravitate to this thing that depicts like a race war or something like that, right? And that in some, I have to think that like if you, the kind of person who would blow up a federal building, like just a novel alone wouldn't do that to you. You already have to be fairly twisted. But it's certainly, Turner Diaries certainly didn't help, right?
That's the question, is like, should that kind of thing be available in a free society if there
Right.
seems to be a link between reading that novel and performing it in mass violence?
I mean, it's a crazy question. It's a really important question. I don't know if novels cause violence, but of course, if you are a racist mass murderer, how do you like to relax? You guys know what I mean? What do? Do you pick up you don't pick up a copy of Beloved or Absalom or The Great or Ulysses. Oh, let me kick back with some. You pick up something that reinforces your insane ideas about the world. I would think.
Although that novel is not recognized as being a piece of great literature.
Sure.
As
Right.
it's
Right.
written by, a racist who is just talking down his masturbatory fantasies.
Amazing that particular document. I don't know. I don't know what the dark web is. I don't know where the dark web is. I don't know how to get there. I don't need to get there. However, like, I would imagine that there are pieces of writing like that propagate, but that one piece of writing has been incredible. And now I'm like sitting here talking about the freaking Turner Diaries, but I mean, it is the perfect example of what you're saying.
I mean, that makes me like have the question of, is it when you write something, do you have a responsibility to care about how it affects your reader, or when someone writes a novel, do you only care about telling the story that you want to tell? Is it an act of constructing society around you in a larger sense? Does your community matter to you, or does the story matter more? Do you as an author believe that you affect other people by them reading your book?
There is a quote from James Joyce, and we'll kind of end here and go into workshop, where he talks about like the proper position of the author is like God paring himself out of existence, where it's like the author wants to create the document that is so engrossing that you forget that what you're reading has an author. You guys know what I mean? Like it becomes like this kind of all-consuming thing, and then you kind of come to yourself like, I'm reading a constructed piece of literature that is created in such a way with certain techniques to produce an effect, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.